All set then, Levin? Yep. Okay. Well, good afternoon. My original intention for this afternoon was to summarize what transpired at the Police Services Board meeting today, which I will do, but other events have caused me to broaden my comments to include developments with respect to COVID-19. The Police Board focused on a wide range of items as usual, with the highlights being as follows. First, persons in crisis calls. The focus today was on a report which came from Interim Chief Raymer, which proposes to expand the coverage of the mobile crisis intervention teams from partial hours in parts of the city to 24 hours, 7 days a week in all parts of the city. We would expect to see substantial progress on achieving this objective by the end of the year, with a report to come on progress made in November. This would be a major step forward, but it should be acknowledged that it is more of an interim step to significantly up the mental health professionals and trained officers who respond to these calls on the way to more significant change. This welcomed expansion is not the long-term answer, which is being sought by both the police service, the police board, and by the city council and city manager, looking at, as they are, at alternate methods of dealing with people in crisis, including best practices employed elsewhere, including some which don't involve the police very much or at all. Another measure to be piloted in the immediate short term, and which was discussed today, is to embed a mental health professional in the 911 call center to help deal with these calls in the most sensitive and appropriate manner. And this could include even the diverting of some of these calls away from the police entirely at the call center itself. The second matter, or second of the matters I'll mention that was discussed today, was a new generation 911 system was approved for purchase. This will include a text option, for example, which will use technology to allow audio and texting to be done at the same time, so that the dispatcher and operator can use multiple media to handle these calls and to deal with the calls appropriately. The third matter discussed was the budget process for 2021. It is a process that will involve much broader and more extensive public engagement and consultation, which will, of course, lead as well to greater transparency. As a matter of interest, since the full line-by-line 2020 budget was posted online for the first time just a couple of months ago, it had early traffic peaking at about 800 views per day, which has since diminished, and this led to about a dozen email inquiries made to the police board or to the police service about that budget. And finally, I would mention the fact that the board received the first of more in-depth reports on the use of conducted energy weapons. That in-depth information is now part of the public record, and this will be useful both in terms of learning and accountability. As a matter of interest, out of the 128,000 calls for service made to the police, people calling the police for help, in the period covered by today's report, a conducted energy weapon was used 179 times. The board will be receiving substantial reports on contemplated police reforms in the next 3 months at each of our monthly meetings, as our commitment to change is as time-sensitive as it is important. And the board remains totally committed to its work on these reforms with the city and working with the police service as well. During the in-camera portion of the meeting, we received an in-depth presentation on the fight against gun violence. Any gun violence in our city is completely unacceptable, and I support the work that the police are doing to help stop gun violence. While I can't reveal all that was said due to police board confidentiality, I can say that the recent arrests and gun seizures illustrate the very keen focus that has been applied by the Toronto Police to this issue, which is of great concern to all of us. Today, Premier Ford and the province announced that they will lower the limits on public gatherings to 25 people outside and 10 people indoors in Toronto, Peel Region, and in Ottawa. This responds directly to our request that was based on public health's advice about how to confront the current resurgence we're seeing in COVID-19 cases. Dr. Davila recommended reducing the social gathering limits, and I strongly supported that recommendation yesterday publicly and in my conversations with Premier Ford. And so I want to thank the Premier and his Cabinet for acting on this request, because I believe it will help us to stop the spread of COVID-19. I also believe the vast majority of residents support us in taking this action and any public health action needed to fight this virus, to protect people's health, to protect the healthcare system, and ultimately to save lives. The bigger fines announced today by the province will also help us to drive home the message to those who continue to flaunt public health advice and put themselves and others at risk. I totally agree with the Premier that they should throw the book at people, we should throw the book at people if they break the rules. Now our enforcement officials will have a bigger book to throw. These fines, $10,000 for organizers of illegal social gatherings and $750 for attendees, are substantial, and I trust that our enforcement officials will not hesitate to use them, because it's that serious. Our enforcement officials and police have worked to educate thousands upon thousands of people about the rules. Some people say that we've educated too many people about the rules before deciding that it's time for serious penalties. I believe the time for education about the rules is over. Some very smart people are pretending they didn't hear the rules, or they are more likely just choosing not to listen. And that behavior must come to an end, and these fines are a good place to start. Very soon, we will have more to say on how we are enhancing enforcement on existing restrictions and expanding the mandatory mask requirements. And on enforcement, I will say that this morning we tasked Chief Matt Pegg, the Chief of the Fire Service, but of course also our Incident Commander for COVID-19, with coordinating all COVID-19 enforcement efforts and reviewing the new fines and rules with a view to deciding how we can effectively, our municipal standards and licensing and police can effectively enforce those rules. We will have an update on that at Monday's COVID-19 update. I hope that all of the restrictions now in place, including today's, won't have to stay for long, but that will depend on the last remaining outliers getting with the program. I hope that they get what can only be described as a very clear message that has been sent again today. I'm happy to try and answer your questions.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Thank you for joining us today. We will now open up the floor to questions. As a reminder, it's one question, one follow-up. First up, we have Matt Bingley from Global. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, good afternoon. Mayor Tory, you said yesterday that you cannot direct enforcement, and the Premier echoed that today. But today you say that the time for education is over. And while you can't direct enforcement, is your expectation now that Toronto Police, who have really in the past 6 weeks or so not issued many fines, is your expectation now that they do step up the amount of fines that they do issue?
It is my opinion that enforcement efforts should be stepped up. It is my expectation that enforcement efforts will be stepped up because I hope police officers and bylaw officers recognize the fact, as I'm sure they will, that we have reached a stage in the management and fighting of this COVID-19 epidemic and pandemic where we need to take the very few people that are left who seem to disregard the rules and behave as they wish and send them a much stronger message. So I can't direct them. I won't try to direct them because that's not the right way to operate in our society, but I will certainly express my opinion as I've done and express the hope that our enforcement people who work very hard at this and who try very hard to be accommodating of people, at least giving them a second chance, that they recognize, especially with repeat offenders, the time for education and second chances is over.
And just as a follow-up, the new enforcement rules do not apply to banquet halls and indoor venues and businesses. Yesterday, Dr. Davila said that 22 cases of COVID-19 are attributed to weddings. Do you think that was a mistake for the Premier not to include those?
It's of real concern to me because we've seen this happen at not one, not two, but quite a few weddings. And weddings, of course, are joyous occasions, but they're also opportunities for big crowds of people to get together. In some cases, you could put 100 people in the room and they'd all be family. But, you know, in the end, these are places where it seems the virus is spreading. So we're going to have a look at how we can, you know, try to educate people better, try to see if there are other rules that could be put in place that address that. But it is of concern that some of these large gatherings, in particular weddings, which have proven to be a breeding ground for the virus, remain not subject to some of these stiffer regulations.
Thanks, Matt. Next up, we have David Ryder from The Star. Go ahead, David.
Hi, Mayor Tory. I just want to follow on the enforcement question. When my colleague Francine Copeland spoke to city officials, including Carlton Grant, last week, there was a lot of rules given about why there hadn't been many charges laid, about the need for like due process and gathering information. I don't see anything in what the Premier has announced today that changes the hurdles that he said were there to stop us from just shutting down these parties, either in a house or at a park or at a beach. So I'm just trying to understand what you think will change now because the fines are higher.
I think that the enforcement people will recognize that the stakes are higher and perhaps find ways to shorten up or make less time-consuming the due diligence process. Oftentimes they'll say they have to build a book on people they're going to charge by having repeated instances in which they've violated the rules. And I think it is possible, while there's always some risk involved, to shorten that process, to have fewer warnings issued, to have fewer times you go back and keep saying, well, you've got to do better next time. This is a matter of life or death. Lives are at stake here. The future of our business sector in terms of its ability to recover and get the city back on its feet again are at stake here. So I think that, yes, there has to be proper procedure followed, but I think there's a way to do that which can be, I'm sure, done faster in the interests of public health and in the broader public interest as well.
Thank you. And my follow-up question is, we now know the gathering limits and we know the new fines. I guess the third shoe to drop is new mask requirements that you talked about. I understand that's probably going to be announced tomorrow. Can you give us a preview of what kinds of things are being looked at or what the public can expect? Is it going to be saying that, say, people who work in bars have to wear masks when they're dealing with each other as opposed to just with customers, or what kinds of things are being looked at?
Well, I will say this without being able to tell you right now exactly what's going to be announced in the very near future. One of the places where we've seen the virus spread is in workplaces, plural, not just restaurants and bars, but other kinds of workplaces as well. And we've left it up to people who oversee those workplaces to manage the policies and to implement policies and rules. And I think that when you've seen the kind of spread that's gone on in a number of those different kinds of workplaces, it is probably a good bet that some of the expanded coverage of these mask provisions will deal with those areas. There are limitations jurisdictionally and legally as to what can be done, but there are some further opportunities to do more to encourage, as I said yesterday, more people, more of the time, as often as possible, for as long as possible, to wear a face covering, because it does help.
Thanks, David. And our last question will be Christina from CP24. Go ahead, Christina.
Hi, Mayor. So my two questions are actually quite similar to some of the questions asked, but seeking a bit of clarity. So just want to advise you that just before your news conference today, Dr. David Williams advised that 70% of cases in the last few days in the province are from Toronto, Peel, and Ottawa. And he went on to say wedding after service receptions have been contributing to our numbers. I know you commented on what Dr. Davila said yesterday about weddings, but should people just not have weddings anymore this year? Would that be your advice?
I know many people personally who have postponed their weddings well into next year, and they've done it both because they want to be able to be free, hopefully to have the kind and the size of wedding without all the restrictions that that they wanted to have originally. And, I think while there are people who want to get married in a hurry for a variety of reasons, that, the best thing that would happen if you're having a wedding of any size whatsoever, beyond literally, the required number of 2 witnesses and the 2 people getting married, people should think about postponing these. They'll have more fun. I mean, if you think about a wedding with no dancing, almost no people there, sometimes you couldn't even get your whole family there within some of the numbers we're talking about inside some of these places. And it'll just be more fun to have your wedding when this pandemic is over without worry about this kind of thing. So I would think it would be good to postpone them, but people will have to make their own decisions, and the most important thing is that they follow the rules and wear the face coverings and wash their hands and stay far away from other people and not engage in activities like dancing and singing because they promote the spread of the virus.
And Mayor, my second question, you mentioned you'll elaborate on enforcement coming up soon in the next few days. I know you're well aware, and your staff is well aware of people on social media who openly say, don't follow the rules, don't wear a mask, have a party, because all of these restrictions are in violation of our civil liberties. Now, without, hindering anyone's, constitutional right to freedom of speech, is this something public health is looking at, the city looks at, people who are openly encouraging others to break the rules when it comes to masking and social gatherings?
as is my practice on many days of the week on many different issues, I spend little of my time, and I don't think the public health officials are spending a lot of their time looking at what people are saying. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and no one would want to, within the context of hate speech and so on, restrict people's right to express those opinions, but they're just wrong. I mean, they're wrong and they're irresponsible to call into question the advice of all kinds of medical and health professionals from around the world about the effectiveness of face coverings, the effectiveness of physical distancing, and the real threat to public health posed by this virus. And so I think they represent a tiny minority, and the vast majority of people know it's real. They know it's taken lives. They know it could take more lives, and they know there are some pretty basic things we can all do about it, like follow the rules, wear a face covering, wash your hands, and keep your distance from other people, and avoid crowd scenes. And I think if we all do that, these people can have their chit-chats back and forth on the internet, and but the rest of us will prevail in terms of common sense.
Okay, thanks everybody. That's it for today. Have a great day.